Happy to be joined this week on the podcast by Mel Kiper Jr., the ESPN NFL draft analyst. And Mel, before we get into this year's draft, I always love talking Mel Kiper history. It's just incredible what has happened to your business. And I want to go back in time. This is, I believe, your 43rd draft. Is that correct?
Very correct. Yep, Peter.
Okay. So let's go back in time and tell me, how did you get started? How did you figure that America needed someone to be an NFL draft analyst?
It's a great question. I think it was the reason the draft tied to the NFL and the building a football team was the actual reason why I felt like there would be a market for a report like that, Peter. Remember, there was no free agency. There were very few trades. And the only way you were going to build your team from one year to the next and improve that football team's personnel base was via the draft. And back in those days, you couldn't watch many college football games. They weren't available on TV. Maybe you had one game, maybe two a Saturday. So I felt like people weren't able to see these players. So to bring them to light, to let everybody know about their history and how they got to the point when they were drafted, for all the NFL teams, even for the college teams that had players, the fans of those teams would be interested in that. And Ernie Accorsi was a good friend of mine, as you know, Peter, going way back to when I was like 16. Met Ernie out at Baltimore Colts training camp, and he encouraged me to put that out and make it available to the public. He thought it would be something the public would crave, that type of information. And I just felt like for one day out of the year, it tied college football to the NFL. And here we are in April, and you're thinking about nothing but, okay, can we get back to some football? We haven't had it since the Super Bowl. So at the timing of it, the fact that the NFL was the king of all sports, college football was incredibly popular as well, that it would be a market for that type of report. And we're talking about 1978, 79, Peter, when that first report went out.
So how did you do it? How were you able to look at players and talk to teams and, being a young kid with no resume? So what happened? How did it happen?
It's a great question. I think, first of all, nobody knew I was only 18. They thought I was 40 when I was doing radio shows all over the country. I was doing 20 to 25 radio shows almost a day, Peter. And nobody asked me my age. I never had to say, well, how old are you? They thought I was 35, 40, whatever they thought. And I was doing those types of radio shows, promoting the reports via the radio shows, getting the tapes from the schools, calling all the schools. And I had the tapes, and I had the satellite dish, the big satellite dish, where I was able to get games that nobody else could, including a lot of NFL games. So there was a lot of vehicles and I was on the phone, Peter, for probably 6 to 10 hours a week, just getting basic statistical information on players that you can get in a second now on the internet. Right. I had to call the schools, which allowed me to get relationships with a lot of the sports information directors at all the various colleges, the football contacts there. Called head coaches back in those days. You would go directly to the source. Like I said, I was on the phone a lot in addition to watching players and watching games. So you had to work for a lot of things that now become very easy, Peter, but it allowed me, as I said, to get to know a lot of these people at the collegiate campuses and with those universities, which a lot of those friendships I've had since 1978, 79, all the way till today.
Is there a pick you made in the early years, first 10 or 15 years, that maybe you went against the grain a little bit, but is there a pick early on that you're really proud of?
You think about that first year I was on ESPN, Peter, it was 1984. And you know how I feel about running backs in the first round. I'm not an advocate for taking running backs in the first round, but in 84, I hadn't gotten to that point yet, Peter. I was still first year at ESPN. I remember thinking, okay, Greg Bell, running back at Notre Dame, was a guy that nobody had projected in the first round. Maybe you did, Peter. I don't remember. But Greg Bell came out of Notre Dame. He was, I thought could be a first-round pick, and I thought Buffalo would be wise to trade down from the middle of the first to the late first and get Greg Bell, who nobody even had on the radar. And they did exactly that, which once in a while you get lucky, Peter. And it just so happened I had no inside information on them trading down, but I felt like it made sense. And I happened to hit on that. And Rudy Martzke, remember he was covering the draft for USA Today, wrote it up and said, boy, that kind of gave you credibility. I know with Rudy, that first draft on TV, you kind of needed something, Peter, at that point to get some credibility and being it. And I wasn't into predicting. I was more into evaluating, but we also had to predict. And when you do that type of thing and a Greg Bell ends up being a late first round pick after them trading down and them, the Bills actually taking him, then him enjoying a nice NFL career as well, I think really helped out early on to get some positive commentary going, Peter.
I will always remember because I was watching it live. I'll always remember the 1994 draft when, by that time, everybody knows who you are. But I always thought this. Fred Godelli at NBC, who used to do the draft, at ESPN, Fred said, at first a lot of people are skeptical of who is this guy. But then after a while, they say, my gosh, he really knows these players. And what I really remember in 1994, when Bill Tobin I think he was in his first year with the Colts as the general manager. You're doing the draft on TV, and you're telling, basically, you're saying that, hey, look, the Indianapolis Colts, they've traded Jeff George. They need a quarterback. They should take Trent Dilfer. And Bill Tobin went on the biggest rant, the biggest anti-Mel rant, the biggest anti-anybody rant that I think I'd ever heard watching the draft, where, he said, in essence, Mel Kiper doesn't know any more than my postman, and I'm not going to let him draft our team.
Right.
Take me back to that day and take me back to what you thought when that happened.
I'll tell you, Freddie Godelli's been a great friend over the years, as you know, Peter, and he was in my ear. And I had no idea, because when the picks are made, once they're made and you go to a remote place where Chris Mortensen was interviewing Bill at the time, you're preparing for the next pick. You're going through what's the footage going to be, the highlights. You're talking to the people on the set. And I just remember with Boomer and Joe Theismann and all the different people that were involved in that draft that year. I'm talking to Joey T, I'm talking to Boomer, and Freddie comes in my ear and says, Mel, we're coming back right to you. Look in camera, whatever. To look directly in the camera and respond to Bill. I said, what am I responding to, Freddie? Because I didn't hear that. He said, just all you have to know is Bill Tobin is ripping you now for what you said about the Trev Alberts pick and Trent Dilfer and all that. And I remember they go, okay. They came back and I had to look in the camera and make a comment. And Freddie took me through all that, Peter. So it was really a case where initially I didn't really know what was said because I wasn't really listening to that. And then to get Mort's version where he said he kept backing up with the microphone. It was hilarious to hear Mort tell the story. But there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of people involved in that particular draft and that particular instance where Bill Tobin, a lot of people say, put me on the national map. I don't think really that's the case. But I should always thank Bill for that. And I always defend Bill because I think if you're in the NFL, this is Christmas morning. You don't want people, you don't be Scrooge here and say this, I don't like this present. I don't like what you did and your fan base. And Bill was defending that. So I really defended him. I would have probably done a similar thing. Maybe not the way he did it, but I would have probably been a little bit more, I wouldn't say outraged, but I would have taken exception to somebody if it was asked of me. Say, hey, all I would have said was, hey, they have a right. That person has a right to his opinion. We disagree. We have better resources, more resources here. We're making a pick. End of story. I remember I made my best call, Peter. This is the goal for that. The best call I ever made in the history of me on ESPN in 38 years now, back when Eddie George and Eddie Kennison were picked. You remember that?
Yes.
Lawrence Phillips and Eddie Kennison were picked.
Okay.
Yeah. And I said that those picks should have been, the Rams took Lawrence Phillips and Eddie Kennison. I thought they should have taken Eddie George and Marvin Harrison. So I said I would have taken Eddie George and Marvin Harrison instead of Lawrence Phillips and Eddie Kennison. Well, they went to, I think it was Rich Brooks was the head coach then. And I remember he was interviewed and they were saying, well, you think Mel Kiper was taking exception to your picks? All Coach Brooks said was, hey, he's right into his opinion. We just hope the guys we picked turn out to be really good. And nobody ever remembers that, Peter. They had no idea I ever made those comments because nobody in the league went on that rant that Bill did. And that's what made Trent Dilfer front and center. Trev Alberts, ironically, Peter, I worked with all these guys. I ended up working with Trev, worked with Trent, worked with everybody you ever had an issue with. Jim Harbaugh obviously said, I'm just sitting here having popcorn, watching Trent. You're bringing my name up. So it's amazing how so many people, Peter, were involved in that day that when you look back, I have vivid memories of exactly. I can think about sitting here right now and Freddie in my ear saying, look into that camera and start talking about this whole rant that Bill went on. So, yeah.
But when he said it, were you shocked?
I didn't have time to be shocked, Peter, because your mind is so cluttered with stats and evaluations and scouting reports and the next team and what they need. There's so much going on, as you know, on draft day with the pick that was made, the picks that are forthcoming. They're always kind of looking ahead, and we're discussing it with Joe and with Boomer. We're discussing what's going on. I'm not really worrying about that type of thing when we're away from our set. And then to hear, I said, well, all you have to know is he's ripping you. And when I heard that, I'm thinking, okay. And I just had a response. Hey, everybody's entitled to their opinion, whatever I said. He goes right to his. We have a right to ours. And because I really didn't know exactly what was said until later on.
Did you ever talk to Tobin about it?
No, actually, I've seen Vince Tobin several times. Great defensive coordinator, and went on different airplane flights, and never. I remember crossing Bill's path at the Senior Bowl, coming out of an elevator, and we were ways away, and that was it. But no, never did. Never had. All I've said after that was I never had any problem with anything he or obviously Vince had ever done. I had great respect for both of them, and it just so happened I wasn't even thinking, Peter, when I made those comments that Bill Tobin was even in that position. It wasn't like any personal, when you make comments, it's about the players and it's not about who made the decision. And because, there's it's a group effort in making a decision with an organization. Obviously the GM has the final say so, but it's a collaborative effort. So you don't even really think about those types of things. And when he made it that kind of personal thing, it put it all on center stage. And obviously with Trent, ironically, Peter, it's crazy how it all worked out. Trent, I'm Baltimore. I'm Colts and Ravens. Trent comes back to Baltimore, goes out there for Brian Billick and has a great year and wins a Super Bowl for the Baltimore Ravens. So it's amazing how full circle that came to impact the team I was a fan of. Lauren Kiper's a big fan of. And here's Trent winning a Super Bowl for the Baltimore Ravens after leaving Tampa. So it was great how that all ended up. And like I said, I've worked with these guys and we laugh about it up till today.
You feel like if you're going to have the opinions that you have, you've got to have a certain degree of Teflon to you, don't you?
You do, and you got to really believe in it. You don't say things for effect, Peter. I never have done that. I always encourage anybody coming up, never just say things just to say them. You got to believe in it, right or wrong. I've been wrong as much as you've been right. Anytime you do this type of thing, you're going to have your hits, you're going to have your misses. But whenever you do make a strong opinion or any opinion at all, make sure you believe in it and you can defend it. And then, hey, you don't have to apologize for anything. If you're right, you're right. I'm not going to sit back and do and cheerlead for myself. Oh, great. I never talk about that. Never talk about the misses. You move on and you look forward to the next year's draft and trying to evaluate those players. So I never really just sit back and wonder, why did I do this or why did I do that? I just move on. And we're always looking for the next best prospect.
Give me one guy over the years who you were really right about that you're proud of, and give me one guy over the years, maybe more recently, who you were really wrong about that that his playing career was a lot better than you thought it'd be.
Well, I think when you look back at Eric Swan, remember Eric Swan and the minor league football career that Eric Swan had in college and certainly coming into the NFL with not being in any major college and bringing his story out to the public, say, hey, keep an eye on Eric Swan. I think he's going to go in the top 10. He ended up going, I believe, 6th overall to the Arizona Cardinals and had a nice career. So those are the types of things you're really kind of proud of looking back. That there's a player that a lot of people really weren't aware of, that you get some tape on, you like the kid and you like his potential, and he develops into a really good NFL player. And then on the flip side, I had a high grade on Jimmy Clausen coming out of Notre Dame. I didn't have a high grade on Rick Meyer. I got Rick like 30th or 33rd when he came out. And I'm a big Notre Dame fan, Peter, as you know, big, huge Notre Dame fan, love Notre Dame. And then Rick Meyer didn't liked a lot of Notre Dame players that year, but not Rick. And then Jimmy came out his year, and I love Jimmy, and he ended up going to second round, was a disappointment in the NFL. So, and a lot of things were tied to that, which were untrue, as you know, looking back about different things that impacted your decision. You're putting your opinion out there. Nobody's going to impact your decision but you. And if you believe in a player, that's what you're going to go with. And I went with my opinion on Jimmy Clausen. He went in the second round. He never panned out into the quarterback I thought he could be, or anybody that was supportive of him thought he could be. But that happens. And like you say, Peter, you have your hits, you have your misses, and you move on from there. But everybody asks, who was the quarterback that you thought was going to be great and wasn't? It was always, I thought Jimmy could be. And I thought Andre Ware was going to have a great career in the NFL as well when he came out of the University of Houston. I had a super high grade on Andre Ware. And Andre, who I've worked with again at ESPN, didn't fulfill those expectations, but had a tremendous college career. And I think that's what you have to remember, Peter. Whether they develop or they don't in the NFL, all these guys had unbelievable collegiate careers, and they deserve to go where they did in the NFL draft.
I want to ask you just a little bit about why the draft has exploded the way it has. I was sitting around watching television last Thursday, the first day of the MLB season.
Mm-hmm.
And I was flipping channels, and I put it on ESPN. And there is a 1 hour mock draft. Todd McShay's mock draft is on for 1 hour. It's 4 weeks before the draft. And I emailed a friend of mine at ESPN, and I said, I cannot believe that in prime time on the biggest sports channel in the universe, 4 weeks before the draft, that a mock draft is on national TV. And the guy wrote back to me, he says, why not? It's great TV. But are you a little bit surprised how nutty everything is with the draft and what an industry it's become?
I guess a little bit, Peter, but not totally, because I really felt like back in 1978, 79, that there was, number one, a market for those types of reports. Number two, a huge interest in what was going on via the NFL draft, because the NFL was the king of all sports and college football was booming. So I really felt like that whole, trying to figure, and everybody loves to try to, I guess, to go back to be a manager when you played that as a kid. When you think you want to play along with everybody and you can have your own ideas, every fan can have their own assessment of players and figure out what this team should be doing or shouldn't be doing. And I thought it was great for TV. I know the NFL fought against that, if you remember back in the beginning. And ESPN believed in it and developed it, and look where it is now. So
isn't it true that early on that Pete Rozelle said, why would you put this on TV?
Yeah, you're in the appearance. We're going to call names. Who would? But again, I remember going back, Peter. Even as a kid, you'd call. I'd be in high school, and you're calling on the phone trying to get the updates. Remember that number you could call and get all the updates of scores that they'd be telling you about. You look in the paper and you get a real small print of the picks, and this is from this team or whatever, and you follow it that way. But I don't care how you followed it back in the day, where you're waiting for any broadcast to be able to tell you on the radio who went and who didn't. And then they'd skip over all the guys and just tell you the name players. And you want to know a lot more than that. So I think what ESPN did was open it up to everybody. College fans who want to see where their team's players are selected. All the NFL fans who know that in order to be a successful team, you better have good drafts, and put it all together. And it became, I think, great TV. And a lot of the highlight packages are unbelievable. Having access to the war rooms, access right away to the reactions of the players, the NFL coaches, the GMs, the decision makers. And like I say, in April, it used to be whatever day it was, Peter, it's changed over the years, but now a 3-day period in April, what's better than bringing college football, the NFL together? We haven't had football since the Super Bowl, and everybody is kind of craving it more than ever. And now you get it. You get 3 days to sit back and enjoy what could be the determining factor of whether your team has a chance to go to the Super Bowl in the coming years.
Has your voice ever given out?
Peter, I think during the draft, I've been fortunate. I haven't had many issues. During it before that, a little bit, when you were kind of doing too many shows and too much talking and yelling and screaming and having fun, has worn it out a little bit. But I've been fortunate, knock on wood, up until now. So being with 43 years covering the draft, 38 years at ESPN, haven't had that draft day yet where that's been a problem.
That's good. Let's, in the remaining minutes we have, I want to hit on a couple of things about this year. And I've listened to your podcast this year with Field Yates and Todd McShay. I think it's really educational. Every Tuesday at 4:00, or most Tuesdays, it comes down. And so my Wednesday morning workout thing in my ears is your podcast.
Thank you, Peter. That's really honored to have you as a listener on the First Draft podcast.
Yeah, I love it. I really do. It's really good, because I think you and Todd are very good at not making it too deep. You basically are able to talk to me like talk to people like they're just any fan out there. And so I think that's a good way to do it, rather than to be too scout speak, if I might. But there's a couple of things you said recently that I was really interested in. And one was that in all the years you've done this, the 43 years, that one of the most interesting guys, and maybe the most interesting guys that you have analyzed and that you've broken down, is Trey Lance, the North Dakota State quarterback. Why? Tell me why he's been difficult for you and why he's interesting to you.
Well, several reasons, Peter. He's 20 years of age right now. He played one full year at North Dakota State, one AA level. Only had one start this year against Central Arkansas on October 3rd. He didn't throw the ball well. He's 15 to 30, his first career interception. Actually brought them back in that game with his great legs and his great athleticism running the football. He threw the ball in, 14 to 17 starts. He threw the ball 23 or fewer times, which is pretty amazing. A lot of guys throw the ball 23 times in a quarter and a half, as you know, Peter, and he threw it 23 or fewer in 14 to 17 starts. He had below 56.7 completion percentage in 5 games against one AA competition. Yet, we're talking about a top 10 pick in the first round because he has the size, the arm, the athleticism, the competitiveness, all those great things. His numbers were through the roof. Like I said, only one career interception. Didn't throw an interception at all in 2019. You would have loved to have seen him build on 2019 this year, but he only had the one game because of the COVID and the fact that they only played one game this year at North Dakota State, playing now in the spring. So for Trey Lance, had he played this year, boy, yeah, and built on that, no question, guaranteed top 5. But without having that year, now you're rolling the dice on a young prospect, little experience at the one AA level, never proven against any big-time quality opposition, and no all-star games, no combine workout for Trey Lance as well. And all of a sudden, you're talking about maybe a top 5, top 10 pick overall, at worst top 10, possibly top 5. That's never happened before, Peter. May never happen again. And I think when you look at Trey Lance, that's a roll of the dice on talent and what type of player he can be 2-3 years down the road. So it's going to be really interesting to see whether Atlanta takes him at 4. Where does he end up? Because
do you like him, Mel?
I do. I think the talent is undeniable, Peter. I mean, the way he can throw the football, his running skills, but it's against one AA opposition. That's what makes him so fascinating and so intriguing, is because he's done it, but against lesser opposition. I even suggested go next year and play this coming year. Go down to play for Sark at Texas. Go play at Ohio State as the heir apparent to Justin Fields. Get that 1 year at an Ohio State at a Texas major college level. Play well, and all of a sudden you're the number 1 pick in the 2022 draft, guaranteed. But without having that, now you're only going on 1 full year. That's it, at North Dakota State, which is a dominant team at that level. He had a lot of games where there were routes. Some of the games where they brought him back, he was doing it more with his legs and his arm. Like I said, only had those 23 attempts in like 14 to 17 starts. 23 attempts or fewer in 23 and 14 to 17 starts. So it's a minimal evaluation games, a minimal number of evaluation games, and he's only 20 years of age, and he's a one AA quarterback who didn't benefit from any all-star games or the combine, going in the top 5, top 10 overall, Peter. That's almost a once-in-a-lifetime thing, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for a team to bring him into the fold, because I don't think we'll ever see that again. I don't think we've ever seen that before.
I think that's one of the reasons why so many teams, I think that's why Philadelphia traded down from 6 to 12. Yeah, they're going to probably miss on one of the great receivers right up top. But I think Howie Roseman really wanted to have 3 1s next year. You're going to know the draft a lot better next year. There's going to be a full season. You're not going to have the opt-outs, most likely. You're going to be able to go scout back on campus versus this year. I think it's one of the reasons why John Schneider traded 2 1s for Jamal Adams. Yeah. I want to ask you one last thing. You basically this year have been pretty outspoken in saying that where people are going to be picked is not necessarily where they are ranked, in terms of talent. That the quarterbacks are almost artificially pushed up the board every year, and no more than this year. With Mac Jones, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, almost, I shouldn't say certain, but probably to go in the top 10. Mm-hmm. And players who you really love, the 3 receivers, and you have said that Kyle Pitts is the best tight end, the highest rated tight end that you have ever evaluated. So you don't really approve of how teams are stacking their board, I take it.
Yeah, Peter, there's going to be the feeding frenzy for quarterbacks. It is every year, and I think I understand that. Everybody's trying to get to a point where you can have that elite quarterback. Think about the AFC, all the great quarterbacks in the AFC. Overall in the NFL, there's at least a dozen that are going to be potential superstars in this league. And you got to try to get to that point. So I understand why they're doing it. I just think that's going to present great value. If you can get those receivers down the line a bit, and you get a tight end like Kyle Pitts somewhere after that third, fourth pick, he becomes a great value pick. And some of those offensive tackles like Penei Sewell from Oregon and Slater from Northwestern also become value type picks at that point, Peter. So if they are all moved up, and we expect 5 quarterbacks to go in the first 8, I do at least, then some of these other players are going to present, like, say, great opportunities. I also want to piggyback on what you said, Peter. And when you get into the third round, is somebody going to say, okay, give me a 2 next year for my 3 this year? Or if you're in the fourth round, give me your 3 next year for my 4 this year, rather than use that pick when players you're not as familiar with. Go for next year's draft, get a higher pick next year where you will get back to more of a normal routine leading up to the draft. So I'm anxious to see how many moves are going to be made from that 2nd to 7th round in terms of teams looking to give up picks, because as you know, teams always fall in love with players. You can always find somebody to want that pick. And if you decide, okay, I'll give you this pick, but you give me your higher pick next year, let's see how many of those deals are made this season.
Mel Kiper, just really appreciate you taking the time and telling your story a little bit. I think every time I had you on my podcast once a couple of years ago, and I asked you the same story about Bill Tobin. And I don't know, I just love hearing the story. I think it's just phenomenal. But anyway, I really appreciate you joining me this week. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. You're the best. Thanks, pal.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.